But the first two, well, they're fair points. You know, some of the language in the books is really, really challenging. Some of the books are quite tough. If we're going to introduce children to Lord of the Flies or to The Call of the Wild, sometimes they're quite difficult. But I would argue that one person's kind of difficult or too hard is another person's rich. And actually, having this kind of wonderful, challenging book activates bits of our brain and gets us thinking about books in a way that we wouldn't do otherwise if it's something that's just instantly accessible. In terms of relevance, this is the thing that the other we've kind of come up against, this kind of barrier that everything should be relevant. And I would say that the joy of books and the joy of reading is that they shouldn't be relevant. The joy of a book is that it takes you away from what you know already and takes you to different worlds and different places, not just kind of reading lots and lots of books that are set in a school, and bizarrely for some reason nearly always in an American high school. Not sure how relevant that is, but there you go. So actually, you know, taking children and letting them sail on a ship somewhere, letting them kind of travel back in time, that's where these books come in and really, really useful. As for old-fashioned and boring, I think not, perhaps. Why would they keep making films of them if these stories are not quite there? So the new national curriculum talks a lot about grammar, and it talks a lot about punctuation, but it also talks a lot about reading for pleasure and about books. And I think this is where there's a real kind of, I suppose, an opportunity in our schools. This is the bit where the national curriculum kind of gives us a little tiny crack, and what we can do is shove a crowbar into it, wedge it open, and then shove in loads of the brilliant stuff that we know makes really good English teaching. Lots and lots of time spent looking at books and enjoying books, and hopefully kind of teaching children, introducing them to these new wonderful stories. Because although the stories might have been around for a very long time, they're going to be new to our children. And the national curriculum talks a lot about challenging books from the world's greatest literature. Now, what it doesn't give us, thankfully, is a book list. And there was a point when they were writing the national curriculum that it was going to come with a book list. These are year 1 books, these are year 2 books, these are year 3 books. And thankfully, all the teachers on the panel said, I'm not convinced it quite works like that, and actually maybe teachers might like a little bit of wiggle room. Oh, said the DfE, you don't think that they'd like us to give them a nice list to help them? Not really. So thankfully we don't have this mandated list, we just have the books should be challenging and among great literature. And it doesn't mean we have to hit them all the time. So I would say when looking at a kind of curriculum in terms of a school's curriculum, there are some kind of key elements that we want to pull out. And through studying these really wonderful books, there are sort of a few things that we can hit. So these would be those. And by putting a book in the middle of what we do, it gives us a really good opportunity to do that. So I would suggest that instead of thinking in terms of weekly plans, we think in terms of units of work. We think in terms of, 4 weeks. And what we do is instead of trying to write them a week at a time, we write the whole thing as a sketch. I'm going to do this on the first couple of days in quite a lot of detail. Sometime in about 5 days' time, I'm going to do this. Sometime in about 9 days' time, we're going to do this. And at the end, we're going to do this. And then as I go through, I can kind of fill it out and organise it. In the pack that OUP sends, I'll put some good examples of that. Because to me, that seems like a useful way and a sensible way of teaching. And then at the end, I've got the whole unit, and someone else might pick it up and change it and use it to their own. Again, writing much earlier. If we do our writing much earlier, instead of kind of building to this piece and giving them success criteria that they can't possibly get wrong, what we can do is we can have a go at something. It might not be as good as it can be, and then we can hone it like craftsmen. We can work on it and chip away and change the phrases and change the ideas. And if we've got something in front of us to work with, well, that's much more motivating than doing something, it being ticked, and that being the end of it. And then I suppose having that time to write and to edit is really, really important. And then structuring our lessons for the purpose. Ofsted have their faults and they have their strengths, but one thing they're really, really trying to do at the moment is get across this message that they don't care what a lesson looks like. They don't care what's happening in the lesson. The teacher could talk for an hour, the children could talk for an hour. What they're interested in is how that impacts on learning. And if we've got kind of great writing in books, we've got children getting better and learning about things, that's a useful use of their time. So a kind of example of this might be the Odyssey, and I suppose some other things we might have is we might have in a unit of work, we might have some pre-teaching, some stuff so that children know what they're talking about. So we're going to do the Odyssey with them. It makes sense to talk a little bit about the Iliad and tell them the story of it and make sure they know that it's Odysseus. It was his idea to build the Trojan horse. And then we start to get this little insight into his character before we even go. And then once we're off, we can have a little look, and we might spend some time learning the story. And what we might do is we might read some different versions, and we might tell some different versions. And the children might learn a version and then tell it to their friends, so that we are kind of soaked and immersed in these stories. No one writes anything down, but instead what they do is get really, really into it and really excited and really interested in it. And then finally, we can start having a little think. Now, in the longer term, we might be looking at writing our own version of the Odyssey. But for now, a really, really useful thing to do might be to have a little look and instead to start doing some writing. So we might pull out Odysseus and we might say, what's he like as a character? How do we know? And analyse the text and try and think, have a go at writing it, and then edit it and improve it and develop it and spend some time working on it. And then do lots and lots of drama and lots of other brilliant things so we can come up with our own exciting idea for what our journey might be. And then we can get into that kind of familiar writing process where we teach them how to do something and show them how a really skilled author's done it or a really skilled storyteller's done it, and then we have a go at doing it ourselves. And then we change it and edit it, improve it, and so on, and kind of flicking through that process of gently working, developing and improving something. That's a useful model. And then the final thing I would say is to kind of leave some time at the end is for a bit of publishing. It's a wonderful thing to bring together what you've been doing and to kind of have it so that it's there and know it's ready. Now, in this case, that might be a couple of times building a book and making a book. So you've got something that can sit in the school library that you can take home and show your mum. But in another case, it might be putting on the play that you've been writing and performing it and doing these things. So if we have an end product to what we're doing, it gives them something to be proud of and something to aim for, and they know that at the end they'll have this kind of wonderful document rather than just the work in their books with 10 questions or 5 questions on things. So I'm going to talk really quickly about role of Shakespeare, because I think Shakespeare is a brilliant thing to do in schools, and anyone who teaches Shakespeare, they know it's a fantastic thing. But often we get this thing that, either we don't do it because it's too hard, or we do it, we do the witch's spell. We do the witch's spell in year 5. Now, the witch's spell is a brilliant thing to do, and you can see why people do it, because, again, apart from you jump past the first stanza where there's some entrails involved, it's quite nice. Some ingredients go in, it looks like a rhyme, it looks like what we know to be a poem. The point I would say about the witch's spell is it's probably the least accessible and least pleasant bit of Shakespeare I can imagine, because in the words of the internet, it escalates pretty quickly after this, and suddenly all these things start to go in. Now, explaining these in the primary classroom can sometimes be a little bit tricky, so I wonder why it's our kind of go-to thing for teaching Shakespeare. So I would say, in terms of introducing Shakespeare, there are lots and lots of kind of useful bits and pieces we can do. And my favourite of all of them is Julius Caesar. And again, it's one of those things where it's quite tricky on the surface, but actually it's really accessible. And there's this bit where Mark Antony stands up and he talks and he explains why they were wrong to kill Caesar. He never says they should have done it. He just kind of keeps calling them honourable men, then laying out this case. And to teach that to a room full of children so that they can understand it's a man standing, talking. The language isn't poetic, but it's just so wonderfully clever. And if you look at that in terms of a piece of persuasive writing compared to, I don't know, should we have a school uniform, or what club should we have next year? This is a wonderful example of someone controlling language and using language to affect how people think and how they behave. And to me, that's what we want children to do. We want them to learn to use language like craftsmen, to construct it and to think about things. So to finish, my kind of top tips that I would take back to teachers would be these. I mean, it's about looking at the children in your class, and it's about looking at the kind of books that you think they might be interested in. It's about broadening their palette, but equally, there's no point in leaping straight into Lord of the Flies with year 4 if they've only had George's Marvellous Medicine every year up until that point, but looking at where they are. And I suppose with all of these books, it's not trying to teach everything, because with any books, contemporary or classic books that are kind of rich and multi-layered, we can only ever pull out some themes and some ideas, and we might look at a particular character or a particular theme across the story, but we try and do everything, then we're into the world of PhD. And actually what we want is children to have their own ideas and to bring things to it, and then when they read the book perhaps later on, or read it with somebody else at secondary school, well, actually they pull out different things and have different ideas that base from it.